Work in site remediation on the LSRP end of things. I'm an inspector in the Bureau of Inspection and Review, but I'm also on the training committee here at the department. So we set up in-house trainings and out-of-house trainings. And so I'll just be kicking us off here today. In a second, I'll be kicking us off here today. There we go. Thank you. This training was put together, as some of you may know, at the request of George Gusek, Peggy Cullen, and Gary Missigman, with Chris Dwyer and Mike Cowan. Gary represents the Powderhorn Agency, which administers the ProGuard program. In the room today are a lot of underwriters, contractors, and insurance adjusters. Those same people are on the webinar. So that's who will be part of our presentation today. I just want to briefly go through a few things about the site remediation program. This is our website. Hopefully all of you know it. Today we're here to talk about home heating oil, cleanups and UHOT, but I also want to point out the forms page, the guidance library, the rules page, and the training page, just to give everybody a little bit of information about those pages. So everybody knows this page. This is the UHOT training page. Hopefully you all know it and embrace it. Here is where you find the form that is submitted with all of the UHOT submissions. And this is on that same page at the very bottom. There's a data miner tutorial, which data miner I think is important across the program. This is specific to UHOTs. So if you ever have a question on a UHOT case, and you can't get somebody from the department on the phone, use data miner, and these are the instructions how to use it on a UHOT case. This is the forms page. If you were to click on the forms page, it pertains to UHOT in situations where you are going to obtain a remedial action permit. So that would be a reason why you would go to the forms page. Also for LSRP cases, obviously all your forms are here. I wanted to point out the guidance library. There's a couple of guidance documents that pertain to UHOT specifically. I know that the attainment and compliance guidance document is something used, especially since arithmetic mean is used frequently on UHOT cases. And the other guidance I wanted to point out is the EPH guidance document, which will have an update this year, probably early in the summertime. There's other guidance here, other technical guidance, financial guidance, administrative, and permit guidance as well, which is all useful across the program. The rules page, and the most important rule, the newly adopted 726F. You would go here if you had questions on the rule and wanted to use it for a reference. And lastly, this is our training page. I just wanted to show we have recent trainings, what we've done in the recent past, and then all the previous training sessions that have been really since the inception of the program. And after today, this presentation will be, wow, that's not what I meant to do. This presentation will be available. It's in alphabetical order, so you would be able to click on the webinar for this program and refer to it for the future if you needed to. A couple other things I wanted to say is that there is a course evaluation for everybody. If you'd care to fill it out, that would be great. We take people's comments seriously, and we try to improve training across the program. And I think I'm going to hand it over now to Mike and Chris, who are going to just quickly go through their UHOT program.
Moved it forward.
This one right there.
That one moves it forward.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Is Gary from Powderhorn? Just raise your hand. Oh, there you go. How you doing, Gary? I knew the other two, but I didn't know the third. Nice to meet you. Thanks for doing this. My name's Chris Dwyer, and I'm in charge of the UHOT program in the Southern Field Office. And basically, when Mike comes up here, we're going to go through our presentation rather fast, because most of you have already seen it. We've been presenting it for quite a long time. So the purpose of this was really to get your questions answered. So we're going to go through. If we're going through too fast, or you want us to, stop and you want to discuss a particular thing, just get our attention and we can stop and we can come back. So with that, I present Mike Cowan. He's the UHOT coordinator for the program.
Okay, like Chris said, we're going to go through this pretty fast. I think in your handouts you have most of the slides or what they look like. As always, if you have any questions on something that I didn't go over in the slide, feel free to ask a question or give us a call at your convenience, and we'll be glad to help you out. All right, basically, this is a basic slide telling you who can do work, and they have to be certified, okay? And that's what they can be certified in. These are the regs that we use. The most important part of this slide is the bottom one is the ARCS rules. The ARCS rules, what we do in UHOT is we take the fees from that. ARCS rules also give you time frames, but we do not use them in UHOT. So that's all you have to remember from the ARCS rules. So what is a UHOT? Everyone here should know what a UHOT is. We base it residential and non-residential based on the gallonage, which is 2,000 below or 2,000 above. And as in UHOT, U for the unregulated heating oil, it only deals with unregulated heating oil, not gasoline. Okay, what are the basics? Basics basically is a person who has a UHOT issue or a tank that is leaking will call it in and get an incident number, and that person will hire either an LSRP or an SSE. Once the hotline is called, it shows up in our system and will now be, it'll be, we'll know about it, and you'll get sent a letter from BCANE saying that, hey, welcome to the program. You have 45 days to send this stuff in along with a $400 fee, and basically that's what goes on with that. If there is no discharge, again, UHOT only deals with the discharge, not the tank. The tank is the purview of the municipality, so whatever they say goes with that. So basically, if there's no sign of discharge, no holes in the tank, no signs in the soil, the municipality will close that, and you will not get an NFA. You'll get some paperwork from the municipality. Again, we only give NFAs for the contamination once it's clean. Again, you need to be an SSE, a licensed SSE, or an LSRP, and we will issue that. And LSRPs are different from SSEs, where they can actually wrap in a UHOT. Say they have an AOC with a couple gasoline tanks, and one tank is an unregulated tank. They can do their response action outcome, wrap that tank into their RAO and get it closed that way. Okay, they're the only people that can do it, the LSRPs. Regular SSEs have to go through us and get an NFA. So basically when the remediation is done, you'll get an NFA letter, and that closes out your incident number. What needs to be submitted? Basically your RAR, $400 fee, certification signed by you as the contractor, certification signed by the RP, who is the person responsible to have you to do the work, and that's about it. What happens with the administrative process? Basically what happens is you'll send your report in to us. It'll go to another bureau called BCANE, and what they will do is look at your report, put the significant data that's needed administratively into our database, and they will check to make sure that you have the correct block and lot, everything's correct on the form. They do not look at the report itself. So they look at the form, put that information in the database. Once they are done and everything is okay, they send it over to my shop, and then we will do the technical review. So certain problems that could kick that back from BCANE for you is the fee is not included in the report, you have the wrong block and lot or wrong address. And what they will do is they will send you out their own version of a deficiency letter, and you'll work with them to fix that. And again, once it's fixed, everything's fine, it gets sent over to us. Right now, we don't really have, we have projects that come in, but not at a heavy pace that they used to. And before we would do audits on every 5th project that would come in. Now, since we have more people that are working with us and the projects are low, pretty much every project gets audited. So that's soup to nuts, everything gets looked at. All the paperwork that's submitted, your lab data, maps, and everything. So what happens if you have any of these concerns, IECs or on-scene coordinators? What happens is that stuff will be handled before it gets to us in UHOT. So you either go through that department to get whatever you need. Maybe you need a D notice, you will get that before you come to us. All that work should be done. If your case mainly resides in the Southern Bureau or Northern Bureau for enforcement, they may take that case, go out to your site, make sure you're doing the work, whatever, and they themselves will close it, and I won't see it in UHOT. So that's something they will do. So I won't see everything that comes through. So small surface, how are they handled? If anything's under 100 gallons, it's called into the hotline, and then that gets sent back out to the local municipalities, and they will handle it in their way. They will either go out and close it, or whatever. Some municipalities do not have the manpower or the scientific knowledge to deal with some of this stuff. They may refer it back to us, and then we will handle it on our end. How it should work is once they close it, usually it's closed in NGEMs. Some municipalities have access to our NGEMs and they can close it by themselves. Sometimes they call back to us and have us close it. Some do not do anything. So it's always up to your due diligence to make sure on your case, if you don't have another open number, to always check, give us a call, use data miner or whatever you have at your disposal, see if there's another case that was there and not been closed. And we do not issue NFAs for this. Whatever paperwork or any kind of sign off you get from the municipality, and that's pretty much what you get.
Let me just interject something there, Mike.
Mhm.
If for some reason the county's not dealing with it, then either the RP or yourself has to get the county to refer it back to case assignment section, and then it'll be assigned, it'll go through the normal UHOT process.
Okay. And this is funding. I got a number for funding. That's about all I know. I would direct you to any questions with that you have directly to funding. At this point, I know there's somewhere between a 3 and a 5 year wait of getting the money reimbursed. So make sure you let your client know that. And any other questions on filling out the form, or if they're going to do a grant or a loan, I would direct them to this number. This is an issue that has come up with erroneous case numbers. You get a municipality guy who comes out, he sees an abandoned tank, you pull the tank, of course there's going to be holes, it's going to be rusted, he wants you to call it in. You take your couple samples, your soil samples, they come back non-detect, you're like, look, technically it's not a tank anymore, we have non-detect, we're going to close it. We don't need we don't need an NFA or anything. But he says, no, you got to call it in, there's holes. So what we have here is a way to get around that for you. Let the guy call it in. What you will do is once it's called in, you'll get your information together, your samples, and what you'll do is call Kathy Regacki, bring this stuff to her in BCANE, and she will make a determination on getting rid of that incident number. Now, one caveat is that all your samples have to be non-detect. If you have any number in your sample, you cannot do that. If you have a number, you're coming through UHOT no matter what. So with this, just make sure your samples are non-detect. Present her the information, and she will, what she does, I believe, is issue a letter stating what is going on, and we've taken it. Again, or this one you will not get an NFA for, so just to let you know. But you will get a paper saying that it was called in erroneously, and go with that. This one's just self-explanatory with the potable well stuff. To actually, there's new methods and stuff to use. Just make sure you're following them when you do the potable well submissions. This is my last slide. I just put this here because a lot of you I've dealt with on the phone, and I just want to go over a few things that could cause a hiccup in your submittal. With potable wells, the guidance says if you have a potable well within 100 feet of your AOC, you need to address it. Now you can address it in a couple ways. You can either address it by taking a sample and having that analyzed and submitting that data in with your RAR, or you can use your best professional judgment, and if there's no vector, you say, Mike, I've got 5 samples, they're all non-detect, we did not hit groundwater, there's in the potable well is up gradient or side gradient, there's no way it would be affected. You will write that blurb in your letter, in your recommendations, or somewhere in the body of your RAR, and we will look at that, and therefore you can forgo. That will be you addressing it without taking a sample. Now, if you're out there and you think it needs to be sampled, then take that sample. We trust you, you're out there, your license on the line. If you need to take a sample, just in case to let you know that if you do take a sample, we need to have that data verified. So if any of you have an expedited review, that may add on a couple weeks to your to us looking at it. UHOT does not look at this data. We just send it up to ODQ, which is another bureau that will look at it. They'll look at it, if data is verified, if everything's fine, we get it back an okay, and then if everything else on the NFA end is okay, we can issue the NFA. So just keep that in mind if you're doing a expedited review and you have a potable well. So again, potable wells, address it. Doesn't always mean taking a sample. Use your best professional judgment. Tell me why you didn't need to do it. Second one is the 2-foot rule investigation of groundwater. Most of you know that if you take a sample at 10 feet, you go down to a test pit down 2 feet. You do not have any incursion of water or bedrock. You can close the case. That is technically your groundwater investigation. Sometimes I see this, and what happens is at 10 feet, you'll go down 2 feet. Someone will take a sample at 12 feet. They'll have it analyzed. Well, guess what? As soon as you had it analyzed, that's now the bottom of your excavation, and you still don't have the 2 feet, so you got to go another 2 feet. So just be cognizant of that fact. Go down to 2 feet, don't have it analyzed, look at it, everything's okay, you're done. Okay, so just, so you may get the call on that if you've done that. Another one is Fannie Mae submissions. Just to make sure that a lot of these closures, the RP is a bank, Wells Fargo, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and if they are allowing the real estate agent to sign off on the as the person that's responsible, just make sure we have something from Fannie Mae, Wells Fargo on their letterhead that states that this person can now sign for us. So a lot of times the realtors don't know they're signing and they have responsibility, and they're like, whoa, I don't want responsibility. Or sometimes we've been seeing sometimes we've had these referral letters come in without letterhead, so we have no provenance of knowing whether they came from Fannie Mae or whomever they had to come from. The last one is just authorized signatories. Just make sure someone has signed, as a responsible party. At this time, we cannot accept electronic submissions. We have no way of knowing whether they're true or not. Until that time, we cannot accept them. That goes for the consultant. He shall sign and date, and the person who is a responsible party. Now, we do recognize there are times when the person may be old, cannot sign. Maybe they're in another state. They can either have someone in their immediate family sign for them. Just make sure that it's noted that, like if that's the daughter, relationship says daughter, that person can sign. And if the person is feeble and cannot sign, they can have a POA sign for them, or someone that is publicly notarized that can sign for them. So that's basically my speech, really quick. And if you have any questions, let me know. Again, on slides that I didn't go over really fast, or I didn't go over that stuff. So I'll leave it to Chris, and let him go over the stuff that you really came here for.
Thanks, Mike. All right, little public service announcement. If you have a question, you need to wait for somebody to bring you a microphone to answer the question, because this thing's going out, recorded and going out on the webinar. Just one thing I wanted to bring up in relation to the 2-foot rule. Something to keep in mind, and you may want to go out if you don't really know where groundwater is. You might want to find that out. It's a little bit different in my region down here, but up north, people digging and then, oh, I hit bedrock, when they really didn't need to dig to bedrock, just caused your client to have to put in a bedrock well. If bedrock was at, say, 16 feet, and you could have stopped at 12 and been done, but you see you were a little bit more protective, or you were, for whatever reason you chose, as soon as you dig to bedrock, you kind of sunk. And if we get asked that question, we're going to, explain it just the way I explained it to you. So you're going to have to explain to your client why you're putting in a bedrock to a minimum of 35 feet when you don't know if you had to. You didn't sample. If you have to, you have to. It is what it is, but something to keep in mind. All right, my part's the new rules 26F. Basically, it was a task force put together, stakeholder group, and we were looking to try and avoid situations like this if we could. There's been a lot of information that the department has given you over the years. We call it a lot of tools that can go in your tool belt. Christina pointed them out. They're in the guidance, so check all those guidance things that apply. This happens more in the southern region than it does up north due to just the geology. But, if situations like this have to happen because the contamination, is such, but just keep in mind that there are other things other than just pure, the result is this, I'm compliant. There's averaging, there's all kinds of different things that we can do now. So, as of August, the new rules are out. They contain all the administrative and technical requirements for dealing with unregulated heating oil tanks. So there's no confusion. If it's not a heating oil, it's not in this program. So even if it's an unregulated farm gasoline tank, even though it's not regulated, it's not a UHOT. UHOT, the key thing is, in its initials, heating oil. And heating oil gets defined. It's 2, 4, 6, and kerosene. So if you don't have any one of those things, it's not a UHOT case. Oh. These rules are more prescriptive than we've done in the past. They're aimed at consistency. Like I said before, it has all the requirements. Everything that was needed to do a UHOT was brought into the UHOT rules. So it's all here. If we need to send you to another place, it references it, but everything is within 26F now. And we were hoping to, with all the guidance, with the new rules being more prescriptive, everyone's going to be doing essentially the same thing, barring, slight nuances in, field things. That's what we were shooting for. And then it's your guys' job to let us know, if we did it. Contains the specific time frames, all the time frames in ARCs. ARCs is exempt. I mean, the UHOT cases are exempt from ARCs. The only thing we get from ARCs is fees, basically, in a nutshell, to boil it down. A little bit more data is required for US grants. It's not so much more. Before, grants were being approved or scopes of work were being submitted with no results and asking for, $100,000. So they want some justification for the money that you're asking. There's no requirement in UHOT to submit an LNAPL form. There's no requirement to submit a receptor evaluation form, and they're not subject to mandatory timeframes. The only real time frame that UHOT has is dealing with free product. And we understand that it's a waiting game. Most of the time you're waiting for us and you're waiting for money. So we want you to get out there. We want you're the people out on the site. You're making the decisions. We want you to stabilize that site if it's something that's not going to continue and be done within the next couple days. We want you to stabilize that site as best as possible so you don't come back, 3 years from now when they get their grant funding and, the plume is moved halfway down the street now. So really the 4 key features is its prescriptiveness. DEP issues a no further action letter. It's the only thing left that the DEP issues a no further action letter on. And as Mike described a little bit earlier, there's, certain examples where an RAO can be written, but 99% of the time it's going to be an NFA. It's only an AOC. You're not going to get a whole site. You're going to get an AOC NFA. And it's residual contamination. It gave you 3 new options. One option isn't new. It's a traditional deed notice. Everybody can do it. You could do it now. Most people don't avail themselves to it in the UHOT world just because, private residents don't want deed notices on them. If you are going this route, only LSRPs can file for a deed notice. They're filing for a deed notice through ARCs, and ARCs requires you to be a licensed site remediation professional. DEP will still issue the no further action letter after you go and file your deed notices if you filed any other remedial action soil permit. And it's limited or restricted use with a deed notice and a remedial action soil permit. Option 2 was what we referred to as deed notice light. It's a pared down version of the regular deed notice. It does not require you to have an LSRP. There's an example in an appendix in the back of 26F that has the form to fill out. You file it, you fill it out, and you file it the same way as you would do a normal deed notice. The only difference is you're not filing it as, you're not filing for a remedial action soil permit. You're just going to submit the work plan to us. We're going to handle it as a virtual permit. You'll get the NFA. The NFA will reference the deed notice within it, and it's available for residential buildings where it's either underneath the building, it's underneath a paved area, it's underneath an easement, the sidewalk. It's to deal with situations like that. Things in the street. You know, a lot of times we deal with it now with a deed notice in lieu, but you could also deal with it with a deed notice light. So there'll be no fees associated with this. There'll be no fee for remedial action soil permit. There'll be no fee associated with biennial certs to have somebody come out and certify that whatever you did is still protective. And like I said, it's a model deed notices within 26F. The third one is a small quantity exception. Basically, what that says is we will allow you to leave up to 15 cubic yards of contamination underneath a residential building. Now, a couple of the scenarios that you submitted for us to go through kind of play with the line, and we can kind of have that discussion as to, but it's specifically for residential properties only. The contamination can remain because the determination has been made that, you know, it's not a threat. There can't be any receptors. It can't be a vapor issue. It can't be a groundwater problem. I'll get to you in one sec, George. Requires DEP approval, so give us a call ahead of time. Let us know what you're doing. And no deed notice is necessary. You'll get a straight out NFA with no restriction, and it will just reference the contamination that's left on site. This was basically put in, we don't know if it's going to work, if the marketplace will accept it. But, you know, if you can leave stuff and, you know, maybe you get less for your house when you sell it, but you paid $80,000 less because you didn't have to support the house to get the contamination out. We got one question, George?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just wanted to.
Just say your name.
All right, George Guzek, Bison Environmental. Real quick, all of these options, though, are not available to us if we have any EPH concentrations above 8,100?
8,000.
8,000, all right.
Yep.
So if they're above 8,000, all of these options are not applicable to us, right? And if we have any groundwater impacts, all of these options are out the window also, right? Thanks.
Yep. Yeah, there can't be any receptors. That was a good point. Right at this particular point in time, until the EPH guidance changes, the free product limit for EPH is 8,000. So nothing can be left over 8,000. So if you have something over 8,000, you have to get it below 8,000. You know, then there's always, every rule that we come up with has technical impracticability within it. So if you have a situation where you're over 8,000, but there's really nothing you can do with it, you know, based on your particular circumstance, call us, we'll have the discussion, we'll work something out. Usually, you know, we throw that out there, and for us, it's, okay, well, you can't remediate it, but then that ultimately throws you to a deed notice. You know, you have to do something with it. So, you know, we'll have that discussion because, you know, it's been my experience over all these years that, you know, homeowners don't want a full out deed notice. So, you know, if it's acceptable to them, then that's fine. But at this particular point, if you're at 8,000 or above, you know, you got to do something else. If you're at 79.9, you're okay. Now we can have a discussion about compliance averaging, and we'll get to that in some of the questions that you guys sent in. Not going to really go into this too much other than the DEP has started a new thing. We are auditing contractors such as yourself when they do this work. Two ways we're doing it is when the incident gets called in, when BCANE sends out the UHOT letter, they will send out a page with it that basically says if you're interested in participating in this voluntary program, to notify us when you've hired a remediation contractor and what date they'll be out there. And personnel permitting, we will get somebody out there to monitor the work that gets done. You know, and the things we're checking for are, you know, if you have the correct certs, because the way the certs work for unregulated tanks and even regulated tanks at this point is you need to be on site for the work you're doing. So if you're a subsurface evaluator, unless you've marked out those sample locations ahead of time and you're sending somebody you trust to go sample in those locations, you need to be there for all the work that's being done. So the guy who's certified enclosure, if he's not there, it's problematic. So just keep an eye on, be conscious of the requirements of the certifications that you have and deal with it accordingly. I mean, these are the common, issues that we find: sampling, certification, notifications, health and safety. They'll usually just point it out. We're not OSHA, but you know what you're supposed to be doing as far as yourself and your workers. Certification issues, it's like I discussed before, no SSEs on site. If the subsurface, if an audit is done and the subsurface evaluator isn't on site, it's going to get noted, and when that report gets submitted, it's going to have to be certified by a licensed site remediation professional, because the subsurface evaluator can't certify somebody else's work or work that he didn't see. So unless the only other out is if you've already gone out ahead of time and laid out the sample locations and somebody that you trust. 1 second, John, we'll get you the mic. Takes time. Name?
John Bueller, Envirotech Services. With regards to the subsurface evaluator being on site, if you have a long project where you're putting in piers and you're having a longer excavation, does the subsurface evaluator need to be there every single day?
No, not for that particular example.
Only when sampling is done?
Right.
Okay.
Those are engineering designs. You're not necessarily
Okay.
responsible for that. But any sampling, a lot of times we get reports that, the closure guy jumped off the backhoe, grabbed the soil sample with his bare hands, threw it in a bag. For that, it's not allowed to be done, but it's not being submitted to us. So we're not raising an issue. But just be aware that, your client might ask, well, this guy just jumped off the machine, with his bare hands and threw a sample in a Ziploc bag. But if those samples were going to be submitted to us and, they were going to ask us to use them for something, the answer would be no.
Wait 1 second.
Oh.
So there are online questions for anybody who's listening through the webinar. We will get to your questions after Chris is done with his presentation.
Maybe.
All right, Chris, I just wanted to ask with the subsurface evaluator being on site, then for a water sample from a monitoring well that's already been installed, since it's the sample location is technically marked, does the subsurface evaluator have to be there to collect a water sample from a monitoring well?
Not if the subsurface evaluator is sending somebody that they trust their work. Because what we're not going to entertain is, oh, I wasn't there for that, when something goes awry. All right, so basically notification issues, don't wait. Don't call it in more than once. We understand that there's some issues with some local townships as to, whether it should be called in, whether it shouldn't be called in. Just keep in mind whether we're dealing with a first pull tank or a previously properly abandoned tank, because the rules kind of change a little bit. We'll work with you as best we can. Ultimately, you know the situation. You have to satisfy the inspector who's standing there, holding up the rest of your progress. So if you have to call it in and you get the results back and they came back ND as Mike described, you can contact Kathy Regacki in case assignment section, and they will administratively close that case number as if it never had been called in. There is no de minimis quantity in New Jersey as far as, well, that's a small spill, I don't have to call it in. There's no de minimis, oh, I got 2 parts per million. You need to call it in. You may not need to do any remediation, but you need to call it in. All right, so the most important thing, and we'll just say it now, and it'll come up in the questions. A lot of the things is, it's important prerequisite for using compliance options. Delineation. You need to delineate around the area that you have the exceedance, both horizontally and vertically. You'll see when we go through some of the questions, horizontally can be taken care of a lot of times through your other, sidewall or, base wall samples. but you almost never have vertical. And if it's close to the house, you almost never have, on the underside of the house. So complete the delineation and go from there. Compliance options are only allowed for soil and direct contact. So when you see a contaminant, delineation is complete. When contaminate delineation is complete, delineate it. If you can average it away, you're good. This kind of came up. 7510 doesn't really work in the UHOT world. It works for your contingents, but it doesn't work for straight out EPH because we're not letting you leave 54,000. So, straight out for EPH, straight out arithmetic mean works the best. We'll discuss 7510X a little bit more, but just briefly, you need a minimum of 8 samples, and you can't have 2 of them that are above.
You can't be more than 10 times.
Right. So if 75% of your samples, you take 8 samples, if 75% of your samples are below the cleanup criteria, then they'll allow you to leave up to 10 times. But delineation, it's not needed for 10.
May I?
You may.
Sorry, Lynn Mitchell. The 7510X rule is 75% of the samples, you must have a minimum of 8 samples. It works for the contingency for naphthalene and 2-methylnaphthalene, but chances are you're not going to have 8 samples where you've analyzed for 2-methylnaphthalene or naphthalene, because that just does not happen on UHA cases. So if you do have the samples, the reason why this came about was to take into consideration where you have an area, you remove your contamination, but you have one little hot spot left at the end of your remedial process. It must be after remediation, and you have to be able to demonstrate that you have the 8 samples. So, as I said, it's not really useful for the UHOT.
And that's why I've never seen it used, it was brought to you. Most of what we say is that it's not really applicable to UHOT. That being said, you couldn't use it for the contingencies. So, we brought it up today. A question was raised and, we brought it up today. Just went through that. Normal compliance averaging, arithmetic mean, 9 or fewer total samples, 2 or fewer distinct sample values. They can't have the distinct is they can't have the same value. You enter 0 for non-detect, and in those we don't want to see excessive sampling. We don't want you to sample the hell out of the backyard when nothing was in the backyard, because you got a lot of NDs and it can skew your data.
On the distinct, it says can't have more than 2 samples have more than the same value. Does that mean if I have 4 non-detects and then a couple of 5 detections, I can't use the 4 non-detects? Because that's a little, those two, the 2 or fewer distinct, and then the distinct means samples do not have the same value. That means if I have 4 non-detects, what happens? Can I use 4 zeros?
Yes.
Okay.
The distinct values is mainly because of the 95 UCL, and that program does not allow you to input too many values that are the exact same. That's why we keep it consistent here with arithmetic mean. And likelihood you're not having the exact same results.
You want to do webinar?
Okay, we're going to go to the webinar now and take some questions. Do spills less than 100 gallons, this is from Riston Phillips, do spills less than 100 gallons have to be called into the hotline or should be called in?
Yes.
That's a should in quotes.
They need to be called in.
Yeah, they do need to be called in. The Spill Act requires that. The next question is, I recommend you direct folks to 714B-16 for the SSE on-site issue. I think that the SSE needs to be on-site to collect soil samples, not clearly identify where the sample shall be taken, as it is not possible to bias the area of greatest suspected contamination if the SSE is not on-site. That's more of a comment from John Donahue.
His first part, 14B 16.35, might be 2, 1 and 2, B 1 and 2 possibly, exempts things that SSEs are not responsible for. And it states that if you had previously marked out the sample locations, you don't have to be there for the sampling.
Is that all? All right, those are our only webinar questions. Any questions in the room? Okay,
Crickets, really?
Chris.
Question and answer session. We want to come and have a question and answer session. This is no time to be silent.
Yes,
I'm clicking.
George, join us.
I'm clicking, but nothing's happening, George.
Show me how to use one of these contraptions.
I'm clicking there. There we go.
Okay, so
Do you wanna
it's
stand
essentially this one, we're right there.
No, this one that doesn't have anything on
Oh,
it.
the one that doesn't have anything on it. Okay.
Because it's been used so much.
All right, hi, I'm George Cusack, Bison Environmental. A lot of you know me already, so. Oh, terribly sorry. I've never been told to speak up before, so it's, all right. Okay, I'm George Cusack with Bison Environmental. A lot of people in the room already know me from various things. I'm amazed nobody's thrown anything at me yet, so we're pretty good. All right, what we did is we sent a whole bunch of scenarios into Chris and Mike to look at. These are things that we've seen on a lot of our various projects to go through here. I'm not going to go through every part of this scenario here, but you can read that for yourself. Look at the questions. Can we request an unrestricted use NFA using compliance averaging for EPH? And do we have to delineate the EPH at S5 where we had a 5,300? All right. As you can see here, the question here, can we request not until we vertically delineate S5? And this was one of the things Chris was talking about with the delineation of laterally. We've already delineated this laterally with S1, S2, S3, and S4. We've already delineated that. So what we would have to do is delineate at S5. And Chris, then you're looking to see something below 5,100, right? All right, so if we get that and say we go 2 feet below and it's 43 or something like that, we can then go ahead and compliance average this out.
Provided that that one you find below isn't the highest of what you were trying to compliance
correct.
average out.
Yeah, I mean,
And then you'd have to do the contingents.
we'd still have to do everything out.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. If we have to do contingencies and all that, if it needs to be done. But if we had run the contingencies on S5 and they passed and whatever's below S5 is less than S5, we do not need to run contingencies again.
Correct.
Okay, very good. All right. Any questions on that? Tom?
I got one. You said.
If a sample is collected below S5 during the delineation, does that count as a sample towards groundwater? And does another 2-foot test bit have to be done in order to determine groundwater?
This is Mike's favorite topic, so I'm gonna let him answer that. Even though I do know the answer.
No, it does not count for the 2-foot. You'll have to take another sample to satisfy that thing.
You don't have to take another sample. You just have to go down
Right,
another 2
we're
feet.
not
So-
sampling.
Yeah.
So wherever your delineation vertically stops, you're going down 2 feet.
Yeah.
And the reasoning behind that is you're gonna leave it behind. So, you know, if groundwater really was at 4 feet, maybe it shouldn't be left.
So just as an example, then, if S5 was at 8 feet, we get something at 10 feet that's below 5,100, we would then have to go to 12 feet to show that there's no groundwater, correct?
Correct.
Okay. There you go. Scenario 2, right up against our dwelling here, extending up to the dwelling, we got EPH at S1 against the house at 5,800. We have a naphthalene there at 9. All the other EPHs are less than 100. We had an EPH average of 1,200 and an naphthalene average of 1.8. Can we request a non-restricted use NFA using compliance averaging? And do we have to delineate? Well, I think we know the answer to question 2 now. All right. Again, same thing. It's going to be the same scenario here. We're going to have to delineate at S1. both laterally and vertically, all right, which is going to mean somehow getting a sample from underneath the house. Now, whether that means augering into the sidewall of the excavation while we're out there, or doing a sample through a basement floor or something like that, we're going to need that other sample to the right there of S1, all right, to at least delineate out in that direction. And then you're going to need something deeper at S1 also to show that it's not more vertical there. Okay? Any questions on that one? All right, then we can go to number 3. Excavation extends to the dwelling. Now our EPH at S1 is 7,600. All right, and we go through all of these. And our EPH average was 5,200. All right, we delineated out and we show that the amount of soil over 5,100 is 12 cubic yards. Can we request an unrestricted use NFA? And do we have to delineate the naphthalene at S1? All right, this is where we start to get into other scenarios that we had here. The no small quantity exception, only available for contamination, is located under the residence. And is there any way to request either a variance or anything else like that from this in order to allow us to leave this here? Because otherwise say for example, we have a house that can't be supported. It's one of these old houses that's on, a stone foundation, can't be supported or anything like that. Is it possible for us to request some sort of a variance to get a small quantity exception, or would we have to go to a deed notice?
I don't know what would get you to small quantity, but what I would, recommend in these particular circumstances is, depending on, what your exceedance is, can you average it away? Can we sample? We can't support the dwelling, but can we get samples on the other side of S1?
Yeah, unfortunately on this one, we did have an EPH average of 5,200, so we would be above that. Would it be possible I think this leads into one of our other upcoming scenarios,
right,
to take another couple of samples here and maybe get 5,200 down to 4,800? Would that be an option?
I would say to not to ruin your slides coming up, I would say we'll roll
cover
this
that when
into
we get
what's
to that.
coming.
Okay. Any
Hold on one
questions
second,
that
George.
one? Yeah.
Greg Busan, SSG Barco. I thought that you were not allowed to go back, take delineation samples in order to have a larger set of data to compliance average.
Well, I don't some of the ones, let's hold on for the answer to that one, because it kind of comes up in other slides.
Okay. All right. So again, looking at this, it leads into another question, Chris, that we had was, can any of those other options on residual contamination, can they be used for anything like, say, for example, they've got a cobblestone driveway that's a $40,000, that cost the homeowner $35,000 to put in, and now the contamination goes under his driveway, or it goes underneath his in-ground swimming pool, or something like that. Obviously the small quantity isn't going to work because it's not under the dwellings, but do the deed notice or the deed notice light, are those options available?
Yes.
Here?
Deed notice is always available.
Okay.
A regular ARC's deed notice, but yes, you could avail yourself of deed notice light for that circumstance.
All right, so we'll go to scenario 4. All right, this is very good. This is going to be very similar. All right, we had a situation where we didn't actually go right up to the house, but we were within 2 feet of the house, and our physical constraints prevent removing additional soil in any of the other directions. We've either got a property line, a gas line, whatever, that's preventing us from digging out any more soil. All right, and we have our EPH average of over 5,100 here. So now we're going to request a variance to use the de minimis. Obviously, again, the answer to that is going to be no. All right, so we're going to have to come up with another way to try to address this, and that would probably get to our other scenarios here that we have coming up with taking additional samples around S1 and what we might be able to do. So essentially, the part of this that's really coming out of here is that our small quantity exception is only going to be available to us if our contamination is actually extending under the house, right? And then we can only leave under the house. So if we've got like a 6,000 under the house and a 5,400 2 feet from the house, or something along those lines, or 6,000 2 feet from the house and 5,400 the house, you would still want us to excavate up to the dwelling, correct?
Yeah, the genesis of this option came about, primarily from some stakeholder groups working up in North Jersey where the properties are very close together, and you might have like an apartment complex where the tank is half under the building, half not under the building, or right next to the building, you know, within a foot or 2 feet of the building. And you can dig out as much as you can outside, but the theory was you can't get underneath the building. So, you know, mathematically we worked out and came up with 15 cubic yards, because if you're going to release this much, half of it's going to go this way, half it's going to go that way. So that's why the department is staying firm with the underneath the dwelling.
All right. And this was a slide then that was added in. Again, this is the thing where the contamination has to be under the dwelling. Any contamination we leave on a small quantity exception, that contamination has to all be under the dwelling,
Be
correct?
capped by the building, yep.
Correct. All right. Scenario 5 here, again, sort of what we had in the last one, but now we can dig out in the other directions away from the house. So now can we dig out more soil in the other directions until we can lower our average below 5,100 and then use an NFA for compliance averaging? The answer to that is yes.
See, now it was different from your question, Greg, because your question was, could you do more delineation samples? But it was proposed to us that you're going to actually remove. You're going to go in, you're going to dig some more soil out and reuse those post-excavation sample results.
And we're going to another one there with to get to Greg on one of the other slides too. So we can be able to do this. So if we can get other soil out to get us under that 5,100, as long as we then delineate anything that's above 5,100 and we have that properly delineated, we can use the regular arithmetic mean compliance averaging on something like this. Now, Chris, one of the questions I wanted to ask on the compliance averaging on the NFA letter. The NFA letter that we get on a compliance averaging is a straightforward NFA. There's no qualifying language in there about residual contamination, correct? Because we've complied.
Correct. There is no residual contamination. It's compliant with across the site, basically.
Okay. All right. Whereas opposed to like the small
Yeah, you're
quantity exception.
explaining that in your RAR.
Yeah. And so the small quantity exception and the deed notice late, they will all say that there's residual contamination left on the property.
Small quantity will be a straight out unrestricted NFA that will reference that 15 yards is left under the building.
Okay.
Deed notice light will either be, restricted, or
Okay.
it's going to be restricted somehow.
Okay.
NFA. It's not going to be a straight out unrestricted NFA.
Very good. All right. Again, this kind of going to collect additional samples here. Again, we can't dig any of the directions. We can't dig closer with supporting the house. So the question was around S1, can we take 3 additional samples there and get our average below 5,100? All right. The answer they came back here was no, the area around was not delineated vertically or horizontally. But if we do delineate around S1, can we get the EPH below, going back here, if we can get the EPH below by taking those 3 yellow samples, okay, which laterally delineates it anyway, we'd still have to go towards the house and deeper. But if we delineate around that S1 and take those other samples there, can we now compliance average? This is Greg's question about taking the additional samples, I think.
I mean, if you're going to attempt to compliance average them, you're going to need to delineate around that sample.
Yeah.
I don't know, there's no scale and they look close on the picture, but I would say you would need delineation moving underneath the house.
Correct.
For S1, and you would need vertical.
Okay.
I mean, you could add those other ones in.
And then we add those
Let's
other
try
3 in, and we can get up below our 5,100.
Almost.
Almost.
You can't have, to do compliance averaging, you're not supposed to have more than 9 samples. And
But
Greg
we only have 8 in this
right, but if
example.
you're going to take one under the building and you're going to do vertically under S1, you are now at 10, which requires the 95 UCL. In addition, Greg was right, you're not supposed to take extra samples, so probably one of the 2 to the left of S1 might be considered an extra sample and not needed. So you just have to be careful about which samples and where you take them.
Okay, but if we did take these 3 because we were out there and we took them, if we, and then we took one towards the house and one deeper, which would put us at 10, could we just throw out one of the NDs and use the 9 that way? Say S4, S3, and S2 were non-detect.
You can't,
To get it down to 9 samples and only use 9 in the.
What he's got 10 samples, he can only have 8. Can he throw 2 out?
yeah, you are compliance averaging the area,
Yeah.
so just be careful. You would have to logically consider which ones you're throwing
Correct.
out. It would be difficult to argue that you should throw out one of the ones closer to S1.
Correct.
But the one, S3 would be a logical one to not include.
Okay, very good.
Or you could make the argument that S1 yellow
Yeah,
is now delineating closer.
closer to S2, and then we throw out S2.
You know, basically,
Okay. Hey, John.
Okay. So what I've done in the past under circumstances like this is to demonstrate the size of the pocket is to sample above where the impacts are, below where the impacts are. And I've been instructed to do it this way. And then how far vertically it goes. But in some of the cases where I've done it, I've gone over the 10 sample rule. But that again is to figure out how much we're leaving behind.
Well, if you have compliant samples, say down in this section, and your samples are now trying to delineate S1 and they're moving in that direction, so then maybe, as we just discussed, you don't include these here. They're already compliant.
And I think, John, you're also talking about seeing how much we leave behind. You're looking at the small quantity exception as opposed to the compliance averaging.
Correct.
Correct. So that's an apples and oranges comparison here because of the what you're talking about with the small quantity exception is, yeah, you're defining a pocket. Here, we're delineating it out and doing an average because we're actually going to try to average this away.
Right.
As opposed to going for the exception.
Okay.
If you're trying to give me a bunch of sample results to say that I have 15 yards and this is how I delineated it, there's no limit how many samples you can take there.
Yeah, because the more samples, just the tighter the delineation is
Right.
going to wind up being. Okay. All right. This gets into a question for us where I wanted to ask about the 75-10 rule. And based upon everything that everybody has said to us so far, we can't use 75-10 for EPH. All right. The reason why I put this one up here is because even though out of our 8 samples, 6 of them passed, so we met the 75, our highest result is only 6,300. So we don't exceed is 8,000 or 8,100? For some reason,
8,000.
The 8,000. So since we don't exceed the 8,000, all right, we still can't use 75-10 here?
No, use simple,
We can just use a simple average then here, right?
I mean, I count the samples.
Yep, then we have
You got-
8, so
you
we get
got
to,
8, yeah.
okay, all right.
I mean, provided you did all your.
What, provided we do our delineation.
Have vertical delineation.
Yep.
But-
Okay,
Because at 63, the 10 times
Yep.
that, we're not letting you leave.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
But even though we weren't above 8,000 there,
Simple answer to your question
we can't use this.
is you could say yes, because you're not leaving 63,000 anyway, you're only leaving but
Yeah, okay.
at simple average would.
All right, so here's what we got here now then. So the answer to the questions, and we can, obviously our 75-10 is out for EPH. We can use it for our contingents, but that would require of us to already analyze all of those contingents for, that means analyzing our EPHs that were non-detect for naphthalene and 2-methylnaphthalene. All right. So we could get out of this for the naphthalene if we had to. If
Yeah,
we couldn't
it's
do
usually the
anything else.
naphthalene issue.
Yeah.
2-methylnaphthalene's higher.
All right, these were just some general questions. If anybody have any other questions on these scenarios that we went through, does anybody want to bring up anything that was that they've seen in the field that's different from these or sort of along these same lines?
Yes,
that we
you
see when we
do.
have this?
You want to bring up examples and have your questions answered.
That's the whole purpose of this.
You had your 2 questions, mister.
All right, I just wanted to be clear, because I've gotten rejected for this. So
Okay.
if you do a post-X and you got 4 sidewalls in the bottom and one of your sidewalls fails, and then you go back and you delineate vertically and horizontally and you say you get 2 clean or cleanish samples, I've been told you can't now average all 7 samples because they weren't all collected in one event. I was told by the DEP that you had to collect all your samples at one event to use compliance averaging on that set of data. So that's what I wanted to clarify.
I mean, I don't think that would be a circumstance that you would find in the Uhud. I don't know where you found that or how long ago this happened to you.
Wait, okay, it's not UHOT, but I thought it was all the same.
No, UHOT follows the UHOT rules.
But yeah,
But UHOT follows the compliance averaging
but
rules,
the
which
compliance
is
averaging
linked to
rules is what
ARCs.
he's bringing up here. So, Christina?
For UHOT purposes, you know, if you had submitted that to UHOT, we would not reject it. We're looking to see that the site is compliant and then it can move on, whether it's going for sale. The new people aren't going to have a problem. You know, we're not looking to make mountains out of molehills. You know, if the site is compliant, it moves on.
We had a question in the back. We need to get a microphone back there.
That same scenario, for the delineation of a single point sample, the compliance averaging, would it apply for both the depth because they're collected in 2 different soil horizons? So
Well,
if I'm collecting a sidewall sample and it's not compliant and I vertically delineate it to a
Yeah.
depth X,
Yeah.
would those
UHOT
still be
looks
considered?
UHOT looks at it as like a whole, that tank is a whole site. It's not a vertical. You're just showing us with vertical delineation that your contamination doesn't get worse. This is the worst you saw.
Actually, that brings up a point, Chris. If we did do a vertical delineation there and we took a sample, we had a 6,000, we took a sample 2 feet below it and we were 5,200, or we were 5,400 and we did another 2 feet, we were 5,200. We're still above, but all right, so it's good to get it below 51. We can't say anything about we've demonstrated a declining trend.
Yeah, I mean, you can make that argument.
Okay,
Sure.
all right.
I have a question over here.
What do you consider being part of the dwelling? Like, are steps that are permanently attached to the front of the house, is that part of the dwelling? Do those have to come down as part of the remediation? Anything attached to the house?
The slippery slope that we walk here is, as soon as you say, okay, the steps are good, then it's, you know, well, what about this one, you know, it's my favorite first stepping stone, right, as I come down off the step. So for all intents and purposes, the department's policy is underneath the dwelling. If you have a situation like that, give me a call, we'll discuss it case by case. Yes, we're not, you know, some people's front steps cost more than some people's houses.
Yes.
So, you know, we understand that, so.
Okay. All right. So just wanted to go through any of the other questions on the scenarios before we go into some general questions here. All right. A couple of these here. So in order to do compliance averaging, we do not need to request the variance, correct? That is confirmed. All right. We just go ahead and write it up. We've answered this question before. Deed notice light and de minimis exception are not available to us if it's over 8,100. And
8,000.
or 8,000. I'm sorry, I keep doing that. Can we request the variance to use either of these options if additional excavation? And you said we always have the option. We can't use the de minimis or small quantity, but we could go to the deed notice light for something underneath a swimming pool or a driveway.
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. This goes into some of the stuff with either on the small quantity exception or on the compliance averaging. In section E, there is the conditions that exist, and it says residual contamination remains and supporting information is included. Do we need to check that box? And then in G9 is the one, do all our samples meet requirements? And on question 1, we check the box for residual contamination remains, and then we go ahead and explain that out in the RAR. And on number 2, we would check the no box. And again, we explain that in the RAR that one of our samples was not underneath the standard, but it has been essentially averaged away. All right. This was a question on some of the groundwater sampling because there's been some confusion with some of our contractors on this with the temporary point. If it needs to be placed in the excavation, before if we had to do this, there was something about that we had to purge the entire quantity of the excavation, all right? And that's no anymore. So since if you backfill the way you're supposed to, according to the regs, equal or less permeability and compacting in 1 foot lifts, if you have to put your temporary point inside the excavation, we do not need to purge the entire volume of the excavation. We can just purge the point.
Not if you backfilled it pursuant
Correct.
to that section in ARCS.
Okay.
The concern is that that we had putting this thing together was you just created a big bathtub, and if you were to sample in it, it's going to be clean because you got so much, downward. We're not so concerned with under the water table because it's hard to compact things underneath the water table. So you might have to do stone, until you bring it above, but we're trying to minimize downward perk of rainfall collecting in, an open excavation as best we can. We understand that even at 1 foot lifts, it's not as compacted as, Mother Nature had it over time, but, we're trying to work with what we have.
And if a field adjuster, if one of your people is out there, compaction with the excavator is acceptable, correct? You're not talking about bringing in a Terex or something like that to start,
I don't
or
know.
jumping jack.
Can you get compaction with the excavator? You don't need some sort of vibratory plate tamper.
A lot of times vibratory
I
tape.
mean, we tell you this is how it needs to be done. If
Yeah.
you want to come, as long as you're assuring us that, yes, in fact, the excavator, the weight of the excavator,
Okay.
smashing it down is acceptable.
Okay. All right. There was something here that, again, this would have come out with one of the listservs that came out back in December with the 1-methyl naphthalene because of the whole, they were going to get rid of ticks and then they decided to keep ticks. And technically a variance is required, but as Chris says here, if you don't submit the variance request on this issue, you will still, process this without the variance request.
Yeah, that'll be a policy on UHOT's part. I mean, basically the listserv told you this is how to deal with, the error in not removing a certain thing from the table in both the tech regs and the HOTS that should have come out. So basically, we understand that that's what you're doing. You could put that language in there, but, you don't have to request a variance each time.
George?
Yes.
Jason Charles, Environmental Maintenance. I saw something in the changes to the tech regs about now taking post-ex groundwater samples 90 days apart, whereas I believe in the past it used to be 30. Is the 90 more of a guidance, or is that something that needs to be
90 is the rule.
Okay.
30 was policy. Basically, groundwater samples are quarterly. So it's every 90 days. But in the world that we live in, over time, it became apparent that you really can't wait, sometimes
So
6
DEP
months.
won't reject reports where they're 30
DEP's
days
minimum
apart?
that we're looking at now, and we try and true to this is 30 days will allow you. And then keep that in mind if you're going to try and do the averaging of groundwater samples. That
was my
compresses
next
it
sample.
too.
When is averaging groundwater acceptable?
Anytime.
Is it anytime? Okay.
Yeah, so policy is the rule, HOTS rule says 90 days, text reg says 90 days. Policy is will allow 30 days between rounds. There may be some situations where we comment back that based on, what they were looking to see was changes in fluctuation through groundwater, seasonal changes. You're not really seeing that within 30 days, but, if, there may be a situation where we would question it and ask you to take another one because, we feel you got pretty much the same result that you got before, but most of the time 30 days goes through, we're good.
Any other ones there on that? All right. Receptor evaluations. And this is now something that needs to be added into our reports. Receptor evaluation was not performed. Can we just merely state this? And the answer to that is yes. So you probably just need to add a section into your RARs that says receptor evaluation, and you say we didn't trigger any of the three. We didn't meet any of the 3 triggers, so we don't need the receptor evaluation. There was a question that somebody had asked me about on the receptor evaluation. There's if EPH is above 1700, Does the LSRP have to sign off on the receptor evaluation?
No.
No? Right. This gets back to our backfill questions that we had before. Does the compaction 1 foot less? I'll just go right to the answers here. The whole excavation needs to be backfilled and compacted in 1 foot less. Okay? And the requirement to use equal or less only apply under the water table? No, but as Chris was saying here too, there's things like sometimes under the water table, we got to put stone in order to make sure we're not just compacting pudding. All right. Yeah.
If you're down 3 feet into water,
Yeah.
you dump 1 foot lift.
Yeah, you're not going to get that. So again, that's something to just be realistic about when you're out there. And then again, also, I would assume that when we're at that top half a foot after digging up somebody's driveway, we're allowed to put stone down for their driveway, correct? Yeah. All right. That'll end my part of it here. Turn this back over. Oh, Jason has another one, so.
While we're waiting, we have a few questions on the webinar,
Okay.
and then we can wrap up.
Perfect.
Back to that 1700 EPH and the receptor evaluation, I think what it says is if it's above 1700 EPH and a contaminant exceeds an ecological screening level and there's a sensitive receptor other than groundwater, then you do need an LSRP to do the receptor evaluation. Is that correct?
For Uhud issues, I mean, that's never happened, that scenario in the Uhud world. But if it was to, other things that require LSRPs, decisions have been made to allow SEs to continue. So as you know,
So
like
talk to
it
you.
used to require that if groundwater contamination left the site, SSE was done. If there was a vapor issue, SSE was done. If there was a potable well to be sampled, SSEs were done. And SSEs can continue all the way up through the remedial action soil permit
Okay.
section.
Do you have a paper copy of that?
One in the back, go ahead.
Chris, the issue with potable wells. So we have an excavation where the samples are all compliant, soil samples are all compliant. We encounter groundwater samples compliant. Well, regardless of distance criteria, is a potable well sample required both on or off site?
I mean, if you had no connection, you know, you don't have groundwater contamination, you know, the only thing I would say is, you know, keep in mind if, you know, we're having this discussion and you don't have a groundwater situation or you don't have a groundwater contaminants and your soil is compliant, but the potable well is 2 feet from where your excavation stopped, you know, then you might want to say, but barring that, I would say based on your scenario, no, you wouldn't have to.
Okay, any other questions?
All right, I'll just turn this back over to Christina.
Okay, we have one question on the webinar. George, what if you remove soil at S5 and S2 and get new data there for scenario 3?
Can I get back to scenario 3 up here? Probably not, right?
Probably
Okay.
not,
Okay.
because, well, you could. I asked the
All right, so
question.
remember, so S5 and S2, we plan to remove.
So,
Essentially, that was the deeper, let me see.
yeah, you can go, and you can cut, can you close the question down? Thank you. And then just go back.
Let me get back here to scenario 3. Okay. So what they were asking is if we dig it.
S2.
No, because we still have,
Open it up.
Chris, we still have S1 that's above, and it hasn't been delineated, and we're not
Hold on, I don't know if he needs it. I
under
think
the
that's
house, so we
figured out.
can't ask for a de minimis quantity here because that's, S1 is still,
I don't know if John was looking through getting rid of the 37 to 4,500 parts per million by excavating that and hoping to come up with some other.
yeah, and he was trying to come up with an EPA average of less. That actually was one of our other scenarios where we just dug out more soil, all right? But that still leaves us with S1 at 7,600, and we're
Right.
not under the house. So we can't use the de minimis quantity exception here because we're not under the house. Okay. All right.
Hi, regarding being under the house.
who are you?
I'm sorry, my name's Kimberly O'Rourke. I'm from ProGuard, the Powderhorn Agency. Regarding your definition of the dwelling, if you had a structure which had an enclosed porch either on the front or the rear of the house that had some sort of a roof over it, would you consider that technically part of the structure? Or would you require that to be torn down in order to access the area of concern?
I think, it would kind of go to gentleman over there's question before, have the discussion with us and tell us site specific. Usually something the way you described would be part of, an enclosed wraparound porch.
It's an
It's a
addition.
little bit different than a deck, or entry stairway.
Okay, and then I had one additional question with regard to the sampling within 90 days for groundwater. If you come back and ask the contractor to go out and do an additional sample, do they need to be concerned with a notice of deficiency issued? Or any type
I
of,
can't-
like, do
Is
they
that
need?
on?
Does the contractor need to be concerned if you're asking them to go out to take an additional sample? If it's 30 days and you're telling them they have to go out to take an additional sample, do they have to be concerned with any type of notice of deficiency or anything negative? If you're
Well,
coming back and not accepting the initial request for no further action on the property?
I'm not quite sure.
I think what Kimberly's trying to get at here is that if somebody goes, if you do 2 groundwater samples 30 days apart,
Right.
all right, and you guys
And we're gonna
come,
try and
you guys
average
come
them?
back, and no, not even try to average, but you only done them 30 days apart and they were
Okay.
both below.
Okay.
But you guys come back and say, maybe we should have on this one gone to the 90 days. And all that. What we're wondering is, does the contractor get any negative points on their review? Do they get
No.
any kinds of penalties assessed to them? No. Okay.
I mean, you would technically be compliant. There would have to be some sort of red flag raised by the reviewer and then, brought to either Michael or myself to look at, as to why we were telling you if you have 2 compliant rounds within the acceptable timeframes. We have rejected some that, people have waited 18 days, people waited 2 weeks. We've rejected things like that. We try and, UHOT tries, UHOT is very accessible. The staff that I have at UHOT, they'll answer your questions. You can call and somebody will pick up the phone, and talk to you in UHOT. So if you have these questions, we're not looking, like I said before, we're looking for you to follow the rules and to move these things on. So, we're not looking, if you're compliant, you're compliant. But a lot of the time, to keep in mind what we think about is it's not just your client. Somebody's going to be buying that piece of property also.
Any other questions in the room?
Come on. Somebody's got questions. Come
All
on.
right.
Come on.
Oh, wait, do we have, oh, no.
Okay, well, UHUD is no longer taking general questions
Wait, there is another
because
question.
obviously they've all been answered.
There's a question on the webinar. Ooh, it's a big one. Compliance averaging for compliance attainment for the site remediation program has been utilized in 2 different ways. 1, during the RI, if you find a single sample over standard, it must be delineated fully in order to compliance average and not to remediate in order to leave it behind. Or 2, post-excavation, if you have a sample in the excavation that is over standard, you do not need to fully delineate and can use the arithmetic mean to attain compliance. Less than 9 samples still applies. It appears that this is still being looked at applied differently here. Is that accurate? Is arithmetic mean being applied differently in your program than it is in the LSRP end of things?
I mean, the only thing I could say is that UHUD is different for certain, a lot of times we don't have RI phases or SI phases in UHUD. Usually you pull in the tank and, the majority of the time, the person that pulled the tank, they're continuing on with the work. So, that there may be differences in nuance, but we don't really do. I'm not sure if that answered his question.
Hearing that question, what he said, and correct me if I'm wrong, in the UHOT program, in the RA phase, you do need to delineate.
Yes.
I don't think that's what, I didn't hear that from what Christina said. I want to make sure that was clear.
You want to reread it?
I mean, I don't see where they're talking anything about an RA. He's talking in the RA.
Well,
It says post-excavation,
in the RI
Post-excavation.
phase.
and then he says post-excavation. and it says you do not need to fully delineate. That is not correct. You do need to fully delineate after the post-excavation.
Was somebody not paying attention during the scenarios?
Okay. Oh, question in the back of the room.
All right, this guy's holding a lot of weight for the room here. Come on, help him out.
I have 4 kids at home, so I don't want to leave.
Oh, thank you all for coming.
So the issue with groundwater investigations, post-excavation soil is compliant down to bedrock, drill a well into rock, you find product in the rock. Actively remove it through EFRs, product recovery from measurable down to negligible. Would a groundwater investigation by installing 2 additional wells for direction of flow would be required in that case? Or can we use it as we found it, we've gotten rid of it, and we're going to go for closure?
I mean, that's the way
At
we
a
would accept
residential
it.
site.
Yeah, if
Suburban.
something during the review caused us to, raise a red flag, we might give it to a field office and a geologist to look at, to confirm. But you know how difficult, once you've gotten a product out of that, those fractures, chasing it, we understand, Uhud understands that, sometimes things don't go the way. It's easy to write a rule that says you have to do this, but reality is another. But the way you painted the scenario, we would close it if you got 2 compliant rounds.
Okay. It looks like they're, oh.
Come on, there's got to be one. Mike's personal desk number is.
All right. I want to thank everybody, George, Peggy, Gary, everybody who came in today, people on the webinar. If you would be kind enough to fill out our course evaluation, we appreciate it. The feedback is important. And have a great day.
Can we get these slides out to everybody if they want them?
This,
Email me if they want them.
yeah, actually, those,
They'll be for sale outside the door?
yeah, they'll be for sale. The slides will be final. They'll be department's website. At the beginning of the presentation, I pointed to the training page. It will be posted there in the next few days. If you would not send the slides out. And if you need any of the handouts, they'll also be posted there. So please look for that on the training.
Just one last closing comment. As you're doing these things, kind of gone are the days where we're going out and, we're digging up half the yard. So we get a lot of calls and, a lot of people complain about, well, this guy, he gave me a proposal for $10,000 and he didn't take any samples. So just know that these complaints are coming into the department and they're not falling on deaf ears. So, just, you know what your ethical requirements are as per your certifications, follow them. When you give somebody a $10,000 quote, I'm not sure people really realize, and they should read 14B, what's required for you to tell them. You got to be very upfront with your pricing. And, most of you we never have a problem with, but, there's a lot of contractors we get complaints about, and they tend to be the same ones. But the way this thing works is it's kind of an after the fact kind of situation by the time the department gets involved. But know that through the audit and through these complaints, the department is getting involved earlier in this process. So you don't really want to be caught, not doing the right thing on behalf of your client. Subsurface evaluator test. So everybody had questions about that. Nobody asked, did they? No, I'm not telling you. We are working and have, finished a good bank of the questions that need to go in. We had to wait till August to get the new rules in. So basically, I would say, the next process is to finish up with the questions and then send it on its approval path, at which point I don't really have any control over it. So we're hoping to have them, the latest by the end of this year for subsurface evaluator.
Thank you. Hi, for the subsurface evaluator test, will you need to have a 4-year environmental degree, or will 20 years experience in the field be acceptable for
I don't know, if they'll grandfather people in. We don't, we're not in licensing and registration, so I don't know what they'll take in lieu of. I know certain circumstances they did. If they don't, if you've tried, give me a call. I'll try and make the argument, unless, don't call me if you're a contractor and we've had nothing but problems with you. But, we look at a lot of the work that you people submit. So I can go down and say, look, this person, you'd hate to lose this person just because they didn't go to college. So I'll make that argument on your behalf if it needs to be made. I can't say it'll go anywhere, but come on. Will, no questions at all? All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.